what's sad is this, some of the, let's say, alternative news out there is kind of promoting this, adding the adjectives, and unfortunately, it's hurting. It's hurting the cause to try to show that our civil liberties are being eroded here. They're just saying, oh, it's just going to be a bad flu, and not to pay attention. You get out of shelter in place, there's reinfection. It gives the WHO and the CDC, a more ammo or more stance for forced vaccinations.
Absolutely.
People need to pay attention, really pay attention to this forced vaccination program.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us again. We have yet another, I think this is going to be our best interview ever, with Dr. Paul Cottrell from New York City. And this is for Pandemic.News. I'm Mike Adams, your host. And there was news that broke just today from Governor Cuomo of New York that there's an antibody test that supposedly shows that I think 13.9 million New Yorkers, that's a projection, must have already been exposed to the coronavirus and therefore have antibodies. Now, there are major concerns with these antibody tests. Just to give you a little background, and then I'll ask Dr. Cottrell for his view on this, but the Stanford study that came out about a week ago, which was widely publicized by the Wall Street Journal and others, turned out that it used faulty Chinese-made antibody tests with a very high false positive rate. And when you have, this is just a mathematical certainty, when you have any kind of infectious disease that has a very low prevalence in the population, such as 1 or 2%, if you have any inaccuracy whatsoever in the antibody test, those inaccuracies tend to be strongly magnified in terms of false positives. And you can have false positives that vastly outnumber true positives. And that may be what we're looking at here. It's certainly what we saw in the Stanford study. But let's go to Dr. Paul Cottrell here, who is about to go into medical school. He's just moved his location, which is why his background looks a little different. But thank you, Dr. Cottrell, for joining us today. It's always great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you.
Well, yeah, go ahead. You know the subject. Go right into it.
Yeah. So what was just released today during Governor Cuomo's daily announcement to the citizens of New York State was an antibody test. And just for clarification, it's 13.9%.
I'm sorry.
Not 13.9 million.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So it's 13.7 to 13.9%, based on the sample size that they had, and that projects to about 2.7 million New York State citizens that are projected to be infected, to have an antibody, that they were somewhere down the line infected. Now, I totally agree with you in terms of the Stanford study that if you don't have the right testing, that you're going to have a lot of false readings. And, antibody affinity is testing is really an important aspect to this, and how it's going to bias or skew the results. So we have to keep that in mind, that, what's the validity of the test? What's interesting in New York, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to find individuals that I personally know, or their family members, ex-coworkers, friends, family, that are coming down with COVID-19 or passed away from it. All right, I just had a coworker just recently from Detroit that his cousin died from COVID-19. So we're starting to hear cases where, it's hitting closer to home. It's not just this nebulous concept of, people dying from COVID-19, but it's in our circle of friends, or in our circle of acquaintances.
And if you don't mind, let me just interject here. I just ran the math while you were talking. Even if 13.9% of New Yorkers are infected, and that's 2.7 million people, as you mentioned, with the aggregate number of deaths in New York so far, 20,792, that still means that this virus achieves a 0.77 8% fatality rate, case fatality rate among those who are infected, including those who are asymptomatic. So it's still almost 800% more fatal than the regular flu, even if there are no false positives in those antibody tests. So this is not the, a lot of people out there trying to say, oh, this isn't dangerous, it's not killing anybody. Not at all. Even if these numbers are accurate, it's still way more dangerous than the flu.
It is very dangerous. It's very deadly. And not only that, I try to frame it in the context of wars. If you look at combat deaths from the Korean War, that was 33,000. If you look at the combat deaths in Vietnam, that was 47,000. We're right now at 47,000. Right. And Vietnam was many years. And we've only had this for 2.5 months, roughly. Right. So we're already at the point of the Vietnam era in combat deaths. So that's kind of like how I'm trying to frame it. So the average person can understand the severity of this.
Yeah, and it's astonishing. I mean, we talked about this last week, and I won't dwell on it very much, but I thought that when we hit the number of deaths equal to the seasonal flu last year, which is about 34,000 something, and by the way, the coronavirus has killed more Americans in the last 17 days than the seasonal flu killed in an entire year. But when we got to that number, I thought that a lot of people who have been saying, oh, this is just the flu, that they would say, okay, it's not the flu. But instead, they just use a new adjective now. They say, oh, it's just a bad flu. So I guess as the number keeps rising to 60,000, they're going to say, oh, it's a horrible flu. They're just going to add another adjective.
Right. No, and what's sad is this, some of the, let's say, alternative news out there is kind of promoting this, adding the adjectives. And unfortunately, it's hurting the cause to try to show that our civil liberties are being eroded here. They're just saying, oh, it's just going to be a bad flu and not to pay attention. You get out of shelter in place, there's reinfection. It gives the WHO and the CDC, a more ammo or more stance for forced vaccinations.
Absolutely.
People need to pay attention, really pay attention to this forced vaccination program.
You and I are thinking the same thing, and we didn't prearrange this. We don't even talk between these interviews. This is the only time we talk. But you and I are thinking exactly the same thing. What the WHO and the vaccine industry want is for this thing to linger, more infections, more people have to be locked down, and to have infections all the way up until the vaccine comes. Now, I believe, and I want to ask your opinion on this, I think that some of the studies on hydroxychloroquine are being designed to fail. And they're designed to fail by not using zinc, and they're meta-studies that are looking at patients who are often given hydroxychloroquine as a last-ditch Hail Mary because they have the most severe symptoms to begin with.
Exactly.
So the news is like hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. I don't think that's true at all. I think it's all biased.
Well, here's the thing: is that it's always that phrase: the devil is in the details. If you're giving the hydroxychloroquine with CPAC to the worst cases, they've already passed the Rubicon. They can't, it's to the point where it's not going to work. What has shown to work is if you apply it early, or if it's applied prophylactically, like for first responders. There's a lot of information out there that's showing that that's the way to handle this. But if you're already at halfway into this and you're in ICU, the complications of having hydroxychloroquine and all that, it's not going to work. So it depends on what the sampling was for the administration of the hydroxychloroquine. So I'm right with you on that. It's just I really believe that there is a concerted effort to skew therapeutics to try to show in the studies that they don't work very well. So it pushes a vaccine program. And the same thing happened just recently. The WHO just announced that Gilead, who's coming up with remdesivir, they're saying that the studies are not as promising in China as they were hoping. So the Gilead stock dropped.
That was my next question to you, actually. It was about Gilead. Yeah, I saw that today too. Looks like the same thing to me. They're trashing it because it's not a high profit drug and it's not a vaccine. I mean, remdesivir isn't it off patent? Isn't it a generic at this point? I'd have to check that, but I think it is.
No, maybe. I mean, or maybe they can get an extension because of new usage. I don't know I don't know all the details with the patents.
But it's certainly not as profitable as rolling out a new vaccine for billions of doses. All the governments just write blank checks basically to the vaccine industry. That's what they want.
Exactly. And now it's not just the profitability of the vaccine program, because it's an annual annuity. See how that works? See, remdesivir or hydroxychloroquine, that's you use it because you have a pandemic, right? And it's a quote a one-time usage unless you get reinfected. But when you're in this protocol of every year you need to get a new vaccine because there's COVID-19, COVID-20, 21, 22. They'll just say it mutated and we're going to have to, give you a new shot. It's an annual annuity. They set up an annual annuity. But even more importantly, because Fauci is really pushing this messenger RNA platform, I am very worried that they put in what I call the Trojan horse. And that is something that's attached to the messenger RNA that messes around with their genome.
Yeah, that's right.
Because he's talking negative about distributed bio. And distributed bio is trying to come up with a vaccine that is antibody related. They have the antibody and they give you the antibody. All right. While the messenger RNA platform is that it stimulates our immune system and we produce the antibody. But with the messenger RNA platform, they can sneak something in. It's much harder to sneak something in with an antibody, conjugated antibody vaccine.
Well, right, and that's what's fascinating here, and a little horrifying is that Dr. Fauci and others who are run by Big Pharma, they don't seem to be interested in what works. They seem to be only interested in what pads their pockets, of their controllers and so on. So, like you said, why not look at antibodies? I mean, there are no doubt science-based answers to this, maybe some that exist right now, but it seems like everything's being twisted. Even the media narratives are being so heavily distorted at this point. We're fighting against fake science every day. When Stanford researchers roll out a study that allows the study subjects to self-select, so it can't possibly be randomized, and people have a motivation to self-select if they think they've been infected, and then they use that, they project those numbers out to the entire population. That's not science. It wouldn't even pass high school science. I mean, you'd earn an F in high school for that. Stanford's doing it. Wall Street Journal covered it. Oh, and the Wall Street Journal author who wrote about the study was one of the co-authors in the study, and he didn't disclose that in his Wall Street Journal article. I mean, come on, that's fraud. That's just blatant fraud.
Exactly. I'm working with, behind the scenes, I'm working with a lawyer, and we're looking into what was something called, maybe you know this, but Smith-Mundt Act, which was in 1948. It prevented agencies within the United States to produce domestic propaganda. But it was modernized in 2012, and it allowed in 2012, when it was passed, to start a domestic propaganda campaign.
Wow.
And so this explains why it's so obvious that there's coordination between different media groups. You've seen these videos on YouTube where they all seem to be reading off the same piece of music. Their teleprompter saying the exact same thing at the local news level or even at the cable news level.
Right, word for word, exactly.
Yeah, and it's like, how could that be? Well, this explains it. There is a propaganda that's being perpetrated on us. And I believe what you just mentioned with New York Times and Stanford study and all this, there is a concerted effort to promote propaganda to allow for a certain agenda to take place, or what Noam Chomsky would call the manufactured consensus. So in this manufactured consensus that's happening, they're trying to roll in this One Health from Agenda 21.
Right. And complacency is the vector that leads to their desired outcome. They want people to be complacent. They want the infection to continue to bounce around and linger so that when a vaccine is ready, there's demand for it. And there's a media narrative. Oh, we must have the vaccine. Nothing else has worked. Right? That's the narrative.
Right. And, there's many researchers out there that are trying to shed light, on the corruption of the vaccine program and all these companies and people like Fauci that are, at very high positions within the NIH, infrastructure. Unfortunately, these people either end up dead, or end up prosecuted, or end up running for their lives or something. We need to shed a light, a strong light, and start prosecutions and start congressional hearings on these types of individuals that are promoting these programs that are hurting people's health.
Well, and that brings us to an even bigger question for you. And you're absolutely right about that. But as you've seen, people in power are not getting prosecuted in America, regardless of the political party. I mean, the real abusers of power are not getting prosecuted. The so-called swamp is not really getting drained, even for people who committed arguably treason or at least sedition over the past few years, abusers in the intelligence community, for example. And yet Big Pharma seems to run everybody, even when Big Pharma is proven, like GlaxoSmithKline, right? A $3 billion settlement with Obama's DOJ. Glaxo admitted to bribing 44,000 doctors in a massive nationwide network. One of their own salespeople blew the whistle on Glaxo. The DOJ ended up with a $3 billion fine. Guess what? They admitted to felony crimes in the settlement, and yet Glaxo is not banned from doing business with the government. Now, Paul, if you or I committed a felony, we would be barred from doing business with the government. We would be destroyed in the media. When Glaxo commits felonies and admits to it, they're still celebrated as the possible heroes. It's all upside down. It's so twisted. It's so evil. It's so corrupt. And they run everything. They run big tech. They run Hollywood. They run the legislature. They run the media. It's insane.
You got it. And take it even one step further. You have individuals in Congress that can trade on intelligence information and not have to disclose until 30 days after they trade.
Right.
Now, you and I do that. That's insider trading, and we go to jail for that.
That's right. Yeah, and that happened. That already happened, right? The FDA, CDC, HHS briefing in January, and how many senators, both Republicans and Democrats.
Right. And Feinstein did it. Yes. I mean, yeah, exactly. With a biotech company.
It's unreal. At the same time that they were telling the public everything's fine, there's nothing to worry about, they were dumping stocks, making millions before the crash that they knew was coming, and they haven't been arrested.
Exactly. And, even though it was bad, you would think, because they're already rich enough, they could handle this. Why didn't they take those proceeds and they donated it to first responders? Feinstein could have donated, said, okay, you know what? I could do it legally, but it wasn't right morally, and therefore I'm going to donate all the proceeds. She could have said that.
Yes, absolutely.
But she didn't. She made sure she put it in her pocket.
All right, I want to ask you a different question, if it's okay to shift gears here, because you're going into medical school. Is that when do you start that, by the way?
I start that actually in May.
In May, okay. Now, you've seen the images of the mostly pro-Trump protesters sort of facing off against doctors and nurses in the streets of places like I think Denver and other cities. Probably New York is coming too. To me, this is a very disturbing image where we have the pro-Trump protesters who refuse to wear masks, who have become the anti-preppers. I mean, most of these people are preppers. They've got guns and ammo and gold and silver, but suddenly when it comes to masks, they think, oh, this is a horrible idea. I was even asking the question, do these people wear seatbelts when they drive to the protest, or do they think that seatbelts are anti-freedom? You should use the gear that's appropriate for the circumstances, so they should wear masks. But if pro-Trump people are going to become anti-doctor, like doctors and nurses are bad, that they're the villains, and they're holding signs, some of these protesters are holding a sign that said, sacrifice the weak. That was on Drudge, sacrifice the weak. I cannot be any part of that. I condemn that. That is one of the most disturbing things that I've seen in recent memory. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we have to make sure that we take care of the people that have comorbidities or the elderly. I mean, I've been saying that from day one, that it is our responsibility to take care of the elderly, not view them as the weak and just let them die. That's just wrong. That's just, that was the way I was raised. My grandmother raised us, to take care of people. Unfortunately, what's happening is that there is this pushback, even though our civil liberties are at risk here and are being eroded by these state governors, there's a pushback in saying that, well, that means that the science is also bad too. And they're not using logic. These people that are protesting, they're not using logic, and they're assuming that all people of authority are bad, or all knowledge is bad, and their just gut feeling is should take precedent. The science is this. This is deadly. And your civil liberties can be eroded. And by doing this type of thing, by protesting in this manner, you're playing into their hands, because what they're going to say is, you know what, you're out of control, you're going to hurt more people, and therefore we're going to clamp down on you even harder.
That's right.
And it'll erode your civil liberties even more. And it opens up the door for that forced vaccine program.
If these protesters, for example, in Texas, if the protesters were wearing masks, then I think the message to Governor Abbott of Texas would be, hey, okay, these people are exercising First Amendment rights, but they're doing so responsibly in a way that's helping to stem the spread of the virus. But instead, they're wearing no masks. They've said masks are a symbol of oppression. So there's no question people are going to get infected in these anti-mask rallies. And just like you said, that's going to cause governors to say, well, we have to clamp down on these things. So they're creating, the very people who claim they're pro-liberty are creating a reaction that's going to crush their liberties. And I'm a pro-liberty person myself. I know you are too. And it's infuriating. I mean, why can't we exercise free speech and be mindful that this is an infectious disease that spreads through the air? Why can't we do both?
Exactly. I think their heart is in the right spot, because they realize that their civil liberties are being eroded and they want to do something about it. And they're worried about their finances. They're tired of, seeing their wealth being eroded year after year after year after year. And with this crisis, it's pretty bad. I mean, we've had another 4-point-some million people that applied for unemployment this week.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. So, and all of the jobs that were created since the Lehman crash are gone. All of them.
Unreal.
It's totally wiped out. So since 2008, all of the new jobs have been gone, have been wiped out. So I can understand that they're concerned and they're worried. I get that. But the point, it's too early to do this uprising. The point would be, once we get out of shelter in place and they start that forced vaccine program, or they say you can't go back to work unless you have an antibody, that's when you start doing this kind of Boston Tea Party stuff. I've been kind of looking, and when I see Boston Tea Party, I don't mean the political, the
group from 2012.
group. Yeah, I'm talking about this, the 1700s. When we actually threw tea into the Boston, in Boston. So I'm kind of been looking for that moment. What is that moment where we actually show that we're revolting against tyranny? It probably will be something very similar to what's happening in England and what happened in Hong Kong, and that was the tearing down of the 5G towers, because the 5G towers represent, to me, total tyranny. They're going to surveil you with this technology way beyond what we have now. I mean, it's going to be to the 10th power, because you're going to have the Internet of Things, and they'll be able to track you everywhere, and you will not be able to opt out, because this type of technology, the 4G technology, this is a device. You have to buy the device, all right? And you have to carry it around, and you can turn it off or you can throw it away. If you throw it away, if it's not on you, they can't track you. And with 5G, it becomes ubiquitous. And when you have ubiquitous technology, or what we call the Internet of Things, it's going to be a never-ending tracking. Yeah. So, that's where I think that our Boston Tea Party moment happens. This is when we start realizing that we do not want this surveillance state of any kind. And then, that's when I want them to, these people that are doing the protesting, start to wake up and then start to act. Well, but not right now. Right now, it could be a little bit dangerous. Let me give you let me give you just a backstory here. I know someone that actually helped organize the Occupy movement during the Occupy Wall Street, and they had that Occupy London and all that. So they were a group of individuals that sponsored that. We were going to do in early February, but I called it off. Well, it was mid-February. We were going to do an Occupy at Gates Foundation, but I called it off because I was worried that people would be sick. They would start infecting. So I said, let's not do it, and let's wait. Let's wait until we start, getting out, and then we start, once people are healed, then we start protesting about the forced vaccines, because Gates Foundation is heavily involved in the vaccine program, and we wanted to show a light on the Gates Foundation that he's promoting this ID 2020, the IDing of individuals, and this vaccine program. And the way to do it is to have a sit-in, basically around it's legal to do as long as you file the right paperwork, but basically occupy around his foundation and shed a light on it. The time back then, it was too early. Not enough people were educated enough. What had the potentiality. You and I are scientific. We can extrapolate out by looking at data. A lot of people can't do that. So they had to see it, the carnage that we were talking about early on and saw early on. So now they see the carnage. Now they feel it because it's affecting them financially. Once we get out of shelter in place, then these types of protest movements, like what we saw in Lansing, in Michigan, or what was planned to happen in February with the Gates Foundation, will start to happen, and then it'll get on the news, and people will say, you know what? I agree with these people that are saying that they don't want these forced vaccines, because I'll tell you what, there's going to be a lot of people are going to be harmed with this forced vaccine program.
No question.
And we have to, as citizens, to try to stop it somehow. The best way I can see is, one, educate people, and two, get people involved to say they don't want that vaccine.
Well, you bring up many very good points here. I mean, one of the upsides of at least the willingness of people to protest right now is that, hey, some Americans are not going to sit on their butt and do nothing when they see their civil liberties eroding. They're going to do something. Now, again, I hope they wear masks. You might say maybe they should wait until a more strategic moment, but at least it is nice to know that some Americans are willing to now see the severity of the dangers that are against them. I mean, Americans have been living as slaves under tyranny for many years without knowing it, without recognizing, slaves to the fiat currency dollar, the looting of the American savings accounts and pension funds by a Federal Reserve that's printing money and handing it out to the rich, connected banksters, while the working class are losing their dollars every day silently without even knowing it for the most part, because most people don't necessarily understand, negative compounding debasement of the money supply. So at least now they're more aware of the threats. And I agree with you that if a vaccine mandate is attempted, and I believe it will be where you live, New York, Governor Cuomo will push a vaccine mandate. I am confident of that. And Governor Newsom in California as well. May not be pushed as a mandate in places like Texas. I think it's going to fall on political lines to some degree. But places like New York, you said in a previous interview that New Yorkers tend to kind of go along with authority more so than, let's say, Texans, who tend to be very independent, come and take it, that kind of thing. Do you think people of New York are going to line up obediently to be injected like cattle with an experimental vaccine that's been shortcutted through the entire quality control system? That's my question to you, Dr. Cottrell.
I think the far majority would, more than 70%, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I think the same thing would happen in Boston. You have the same kind of, Boston's a little bit more intelligentsia. New York's a little bit more business oriented, but they both lean very, very liberal. And I would definitely, I think that those individuals, the far majority of the population would accept it because they're afraid that they wouldn't be going back to work. And that's how they scare you. And they're not case species. They're not like the sheepdogs, like you and I. When we see something, we want to do something about it. We want to protect the herd, right? We want to solve the problem. And these individuals, they're like sheep. They herd together, and they think there's safety in numbers. And if the peripheral get attacked, at least the inner core is protected, and that's how they think. Well, you and I think much differently. But I would say 70% of the population in New York would accept the vaccine. But I'm one of those rare birds in New York where it's like, I'm a Republican and I'm in New York. I'm in New York City, and I'm definitely not taking that vaccine, that messenger RNA vaccine from Fauci, because I'm very scared of it. I think there's no proof. Here, just looking at it from a scientific point of view, there's lots of evidence that vaccines cause damage. There is lots of evidence that if you speed through something, that you may be bringing in something that you completely don't know because you haven't done further testing. And this is new. We're dealing with a new virus that was bioengineered, and we're dealing with a new platform that we have no idea when I mean by new platform for vaccines, that we have no idea what the 10-year, downstream, how it affects our tumor suppressor genes or oncogenes. And this goes right in line with what with Dr. Judy Mikovits, is talking about. It's like, these vaccines hurt. They hurt people, and they cause diseases like cancer. And we need to be very vigilant what we put in our bodies, especially if it's like instituted by these big organizations like the WHO. Which is run by China. Yeah, exactly.
And when Bill Gates rolls out a new operating system like Windows 10, I won't touch that thing for 3 or 4 years because, and that doesn't alter my genes. It doesn't invade my blood. But I don't trust Windows 10. Even to this day, in my lab, by the way, almost all the instruments from Agilent and Waters and everything, they all run on Windows 7 because even the lab companies won't use Windows 10.
Right.
What were you going to say?
Not only don't I trust Windows 10, I don't trust the intermediate updates. Right. Once you do an intermediate update, your system never works the way it used to.
Yeah, and the updates are forced on Windows 10, which is just like basically it's forced vaccination of your computer operating system. So I don't even trust Bill Gates' software. Why would I trust a Bill Gates vaccine that's a forced vaccine with an annual update, right? That's also going to change your biological operating system in ways that you can't even imagine. The human body is a complex system. The best scientists and medicine practitioners in the world still only barely scratch the surface of the complexity and the emergent properties of this complex system.
I have this phrase to kind of encapsulate what you just said. I don't want to be blue screened by this vaccine. And everyone that knows anything about Microsoft products, you get that blue screen of death, and that's what Bill Gates is going to give us. Bill Gates is going to give us the blue screen of death biologically.
You're absolutely correct. That's a very important metaphor. I'll probably borrow that if you don't mind.
No problem.
The thing is, I see convergence. Getting to the politics of this, I see those on the political left are trying to amplify the fear factor as much as possible, and those on the political right are pushing complacency. But both of these things converge and lead to mandatory vaccines. It's divide and conquer. It's complacency leads to more infections, more lockdowns, and eventually vaccines. Whereas, the New York Times approach and the left-wing media, which has been, this is going to kill everybody, that also leads to vaccines. But it's as if both the political establishments, both tribes, have been told to push everybody toward vaccines. Just use opposite narratives so that the country can pretend to be in two different points of view, but it all leads to Bill Gates. You know what I mean?
Well, I early on when I was covering this COVID-19 crisis, and it wasn't even called COVID-19 back then, it was just called Wuhan virus. I explain it that the eye in the sky, all right, the powers that be, the eye in the sky is really the New World Order, right? Yeah. So the eye in the sky, how it gains power over us is trying to divide us. And it's when we come together, the right and the left, where we can fight that. But what they have done is they've wedged us into these camps of right and left. And it's been so polar in the last 2 years, 3 years, where Republicans will say that everything that the Democrats are saying are wrong, and the Democrats are saying that everything the Republicans are saying are wrong, and no one can, reach a middle ground. You're right, absolutely. They have divided us, and now, because they have divided us, they can roll in these policies, of forced vaccine and chipping and controlling if you're going to go to work or not. I just once we get out of shelter in place and most of the country is, out of that first wave of infection, right now New York is, in the downward trajectory. We should be near the bottom of this first peak, May 15th. Okay, so us sheltering in place to May 15th makes sense. It's taxing psychologically. Believe me, I know how taxing it is. Yeah. And it's taxing on individuals if they've been laid off. My heart goes out to them because they're struggling. But once we get past this first wave, we need to reassess, and reassert our civil liberties. And this is where the citizenry can start to be engaged and say, no, you're not going to do this.
Yes.
You can't do that right now because you can infect people. But we're getting close, depending on where you are, in the country. But somewhere near the end of May or the end of June is that point in time where that Boston Tea Party moment has to happen to prevent this. But the Boston Tea Party moment can't happen right now because of possible cross-infection. Right.
Really good point. The timing is critical here. If everybody goes out too early and doesn't take precautions, they can just spread the infection more, resulting in longer lockdown times. Let me get to the you and I are both science-minded individuals, and we're driven largely by data and critical thinking about the data. A disturbing thing that I've noticed in this is, this gets to the political parties again. For years, the conservatives have attacked the fake climate change science of the left, where a lot of rigged numbers, rigged models, the hockey stick model. No matter what data you put into their model, it would produce a hockey stick. Amazing. The bad science of the left saying carbon dioxide is a pollutant when it's actually necessary for photosynthesis for all food crops and all rainforests and all plants on the planet. And yet now the Republican side, the conservative side, is more than happy to latch on to bad science like the Stanford study. Even when you can demonstrate that it's not a randomized study, the antibodies produce false positives, they don't care because it fits their narrative. So I'm actually seeing the exact same behavior on the part of like Fox News or Rush Limbaugh, people like that, as what we saw with the bad climate science on the left. And on top of that, people like Rush Limbaugh would make fun of leftists for having no biological reality understanding when they would say a biological man can be a biological woman, for example, which of course is nonsense. But then when it comes to, the virus isn't very dangerous, it's not real, whatever, conservatives are happy to latch on to that false narrative. So why is there a total abandonment of principles of science? And it's just narrative pursuit now by the two parties.
You're bringing up a great point, and I think it boils down to this very fact that our science education in the United States is very low. The math and science in high school and even in college, students aren't coming out with science degrees. They're coming out with liberal arts degrees. And I'm all about, I would rather, if I had a business, I'd rather hire someone that was self-taught in engineering or in science, because they have that mind to ask questions and look at data. So you don't have to just go and get a degree, but the thing is you gotta train yourself to think in a scientific way, right? And that's not happening in school.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, everyone wants to be a lawyer. Everyone wants to be, getting an MBA, and no one wants to get a biology degree or an engineering degree or learn about chemistry. Chemistry's not easy. Chemistry's hard, but it's fun. But it is fun, and it's a very interesting thing. But it's not an easy thing but it's easier to learn law, or to learn, elements of business in an MBA.
Or economics. In economics, you can have the most bizarre, crazy theories and still be an economic scientist and win Nobel Prizes for that stuff. It doesn't even have to be true.
Well, right, because the way economics works is, as long as you would just preface it with, well, based on this particular theoretical framework,
right?
And based on that, this is how we model it. And then by doing that, you can do anything. You can model, you can put any assumptions you want to prove the theory. So it's very simulation based.
Well, the whole Keynesian MMT approach to economics is based on the assumption that human consumers are rational at all times. I mean, come on, they're not rational. People aren't rational in the way they make decisions. They're wildly irrational.
Right, exactly. So a lot of the cutting edge research that's in this area is behavioral finance.
Yeah.
And realizing there's disequilibriums in markets, and how do actors, rational actors, a certain percentage of them will act rationally, and a certain percentage of them will act irrationally, and it creates this chaotic situation that happens. That's kind of the field that I kind of focused on, was this chaos theory within in the financial markets, because of this disequilibrium between rational actors and irrational actors. But you're absolutely right. And here's the thing: is that we have to improve our educational baseline in the United States. But because we haven't had that, and everyone wants this immediacy of wealth, thinking that if you're a lawyer you'll get wealthy, or if you're an MBA you'll get to Goldman Sachs and work at Wall Street and you're gonna make a ton of money. That's their mindset. So they don't really focus on the sciences during their educational years. And so unfortunately, when you're dealing with science, you're going to have a group of people based on the methodology of that particular study saying one thing, and you'll have another group of people saying another. And the ones that are being truthful to the science, they're going to look at both of them and see, how did they do the study? What was the methodology? What was the conclusion? And be able to decide if it's a valid study or not. But unfortunately, what's happening is that people read the headline on the study to try to prove their point. They don't even bother to read half of the abstract, let alone the whole paper, and then they say, well, here's the study that proves my point. And they just keep on. I see it on my channel all the time, because I have people that are, on our side of this debate. And I have people on the channel watching to try to debunk me. And so they'll, come out with, well, this study and this study. The biggest example of this was when Nature came out with the zoonotic theory for this virus. And I had to spend 2.5 hours. I was so confident that I was right about this because of all the stuff that we talked about on previous episodes, that I went live, didn't even read their study. I read it word for word. It took me 2.5 hours, and I poked 25 different holes in the study on why what Nature was saying was false, that it was not zoonotic, and they were not being truthful to explaining the whole genesis of this virus. They took bits and pieces of it, packaged it in a scholarly way to try to push a certain agenda, which was the zoonotic agenda, to hide the weapons program.
Yes,
because they're trying to hide what happened in Wuhan and what happened at Fort Detrick at the same time.
Right.
And Nature is in line with it. And this is not the first time it's happened. This happened to Dr. Judy Mikovits, where Nature was doing publications to push a certain agenda, not the science, but an agenda that was antithetical to the real science that she was publishing. So, people need to realize that this is not the New York Times where you can just pick and choose and, pick, if you want, if it's meeting your particular political, persuasion here.
Right.
Science is, it's about truth. It's about truth. So, a lot of people go on my channel and they go, well, I don't understand why Paul keeps on wearing the Harvard shirts, even though I go to Harvard, for my master's program. But the motto, it's subliminal. The motto is Veritas. Well, we all know Veritas is truth. So I wear it to try to speak truth, try to use the scientific method, try to get to that, to the root of what is really happening to us. And that is, we have a deadly disease that was man-made. There's a lot of nefarious things happening, and there's an erosion of our civil liberties, and it's very self-evident that there is a global play on our civil liberties. And if we don't wake up, if we don't see the Veritas, we are going to lose our Constitution.
Yes.
And so that's
one of the reasons why I've been so adamant about this. And by the way, I've been banned by other independent media platforms for saying that the virus is real. Just so you know, just to share.
Which one? Which one?
I don't want to name names, but I've been banned on independent media, yes, for saying that this is not a hoax, that the virus is actually killing people. But
wow.
One of the things that really disturbs me, or even for claiming to be a scientist, which I am. I'm the co-author of a peer-reviewed published paper, the top paper of the year in 2017 in Chromatography Online. And I run a science lab. It's ISO accredited. We're audited. I mean, I'm an active practicing scientist. I probably need to get to the lab today, frankly, to work on this glyphosate method. But what I'm seeing is that there are masses of people who are now who have no science education, no science background, that are trying to interpret scientific studies. and yet they don't understand the very basics of statistics, such as, intervals of confidence in the data. So you may have, even like the Stanford study, for example, the interval, the possible spread of the data was so wide that it could include zero positives. Which means, well, what is this study saying? That basically they wrote an entire paper off of data that could be nothing but random chance. That's like if I took a coin and flipped it 100 times, and at some point in that I got a series of 8 heads in a row, and then I wrote a paper that said coins almost always come up heads. Look at these 8 tosses. Look at that. That's not science. Mm-hmm. The sample size is all wrong. The interval of confidence. But you've got all these people now. Everybody has an opinion about the science, but almost nobody's qualified to even touch it. That's the issue.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. Let alone math and science, but statistics is very important in the scientific method. But for sure, anyone that's done research, realizes this. Unfortunately, a lot of people have very little knowledge of statistics, just the basics of it. So this study that you're referencing, it was designed to persuade a group of people a certain way. That's what happened. It wasn't about science. It was like a psyop in a way, where it was to put something out there, get enough people to read it, and have a certain opinion about it, and they would react a certain way in the public square. And they did exactly that. Their mission was accomplished.
Yeah. People
like you and I need to call them off on it and say, hey, that's a bogus study. This is not the right way to do things. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of effort to raise that awareness with people because of they had that study with name recognition. Stanford, they got to be. Anything that comes from there, it's got to be right. Everything must be right from there. Right. And unfortunately, a lot of things are wrong from there.
Well, and the fact, if you want a demonstration that people really can't do math, look at how many people buy lotto tickets when the odds are against them, or go to Vegas and gamble. Here, this is an interesting experiment. I've actually done this with people. Just explain to them, look, here's a coin. The coin is fair. It's 50-50, heads or tails. And if I flip this coin and at some point I get a series of, let's say, 5 heads, ask the person, what's the chance that the next coin toss, the 6th one, will be heads? You'll get basically 3 answers. Some people will say, well, it must be like 80% chance because it's on a run. Other people will say it's lower than 50% because it has to even out. And then the third type of person will say it's 50% because, you know why? Because coins don't have memories. And the third person is correct. But I guarantee you, 2/3 of Americans won't give you the right answer to that. Maybe 80% of Americans. I don't know the exact number, but it's a high number. And that's scary. They don't know how a coin toss works.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. They're absolutely right. They always think, and you can kind of see it with people's retirement. They're always betting that they're going to win big later down the road. Oh, don't worry about it. I'll win big later. I'll win big later. It's always the Vegas, the Vegas theory. That I'll just one more slot pull and I'll win big.
Right. Well, you study chaos theory in finance. You know that the average retail investor, buys high and sells low. Even though they tell you they're doing the opposite, but you look at their behavior and their history, they're buying high and selling low.
Right, exactly. And it's because they're in most of those cases they're trading on fear, and there's a manipulation of the market. People know that a far majority of these retail traders are trading on fear, so they can place positions that assume that behavior. That's what I mean by rational actors and irrational actors. The irrational actors are the ones that you just mentioned. the rational actors are knowing that they're going to be irrational, and they're placing their bets that they'll be irrational, and then they can make money on it. So that's why there's a lot of times why these individuals, they'll sell because they're in fear mode, and the rational actors will go, you know what? It's sold too low, I'm going to buy, and then it starts to mean revert, and they make a lot of money.
Right. I wish I would have gone into behavioral economics, actually, and check this out. We're probably getting close to running out of time, but there's a behavioral economics experiment involving primates where monkeys, maybe you've seen this, monkeys have a choice to go to one of two different windows to get free grapes. And in front of window number 1, there's a human being with 3 grapes in their hand. When the monkey shows up, the human removes 1 grape to give the monkey 2. On another window, there's a human being with 1 grape in their hand. When the monkey shows up, the human adds a grape to equal 2. Which window do you think the monkey likes to go to? They like the window where it's buy one, get one free, even though it's the same number of grapes, because they feel like that window is more generous, even though it's the same number of grapes. So even monkeys don't act rationally. And I'm not saying humans are monkeys, but we are primates, and humans, I guarantee you there's people living in your town that are way less rational than a monkey.
Right. Well, I'll go one step further. I think humans at times act like monkeys and pigs.
Well, do explain.
Well, especially when they're drunk.
Oh, I see. I see. Is that like a men are pigs? Or are you talking about eating at the Golden Corral?
No, just the way they eat, or the way the way people may have their dwelling. They're disorganized. But the people in general, there are a lot of similarities on personalities and animal traits. And there's a folklore. Maybe you've heard this, maybe you haven't. But when Noah got off the ark, the very first thing he does is he plants a vineyard, right? Well, he had to do a sacrifice for the vineyard to bless the vineyard. And if I remember the story right, he had to sacrifice certain animals, and each one of those animals represents different phases of being drunk. Right? A monkey, a lion, a pig. So, and if during the college years or you would see that certain people, they acted, funny. They were like more monkeyish. If they were, some people, if they were drunk, that, they were more lionish, they were more aggressive, so it's interesting that people's traits sometimes do have similarities to certain types of animals.
Yeah. Well, the whole Chinese calendar zodiac thing is all about, what year you're born and what's your animal, monkeys, chicken.
Right. Mine is the rat. Mine's the rat.
You're the rat.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not even going to say what because I try not to let people figure out my birthday for security reasons. But anyway, look, this has been a fascinating discussion, about antibodies and liberties and where all this is going. But if you were to summarize this conversation today, what should people take away from this? What would that be?
Well, I think it's 2 things. One is, like what you said, we have to be cognizant that if we're going to protest in areas where there's infection, that you could spread the disease, and that it is more prudent that we wait until we get out of shelter in place or quarantine, and then start to protest about our civil liberties and these forced vaccines. So just be patient. We're almost over the hump here for the first wave. So that's one key point here. I think the second really big key point is that we watch what Governor Cuomo is saying, because I think he's the canary in the coal mine when it comes to testing for antibodies and then setting up in place a surveillance to say, well, you know what, if you don't have the antibody, you can't go to work, and we're going to do contact tracing. that if you do get sick when we get out of shelter in place, that there are 3 organizations that are going to be tracking us. Bloomberg LP is one, Vital Strategies is another, in conjunction with Johns Hopkins. So, and this is all being orchestrated right now and beta tested through the tri-state area, Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York. So watch out for that, because what happens there, what happens where I'm at right now, in the next few weeks is going to be rolled out to an area near you. And I'm concerned that it's going to be, you can't go to work unless you have the antibody, and they're going to start rolling in and track individuals that don't have antibodies, and they're going to force a vaccine. So just keep that in mind, that they're just starting to roll the tracking mechanism out. And those three organizations I just mentioned are key players in it.
Speaking of what you just said, just behavioral economics question, wouldn't this incentivize people to go get infected so they can have antibodies so they can return to work? I mean, isn't this a disincentive for public health?
Well, yeah. I mean, someone that thinks that, well, it's not that big of a deal, and this is like the common, if they think that it's just the common flu, and they go and get infected so they can get an antibody and go back to work after 14 or 20 days, they may do that. Unfortunately, they may have a comorbidity.
Right. I mean, we're going to have underground COVID-19 parties listed on Craigslist.
Half the population in the United States is sick to some degree.
Yeah.
And we don't have proper health in the United States, and that's why the stuff that the information you provide on natural news and the products that you sell are to try to boost people's immune system, to help their health, to boost their health.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we're talking about millions and millions and millions of individuals in the United States that are unhealthy. So you're going to have, if people do that, there's going to be an awful lot of individuals that end up on the short end of the stick, and they get into an ICU, in an ICU unit. They could die if they do this. So it's not a prudent thing to do. But you're right. They're going to act in a certain way where they're going to try to take it in their own hands because they're afraid of the forced vaccine, and say they're going to take the chance. It's a strange thing. They're going to say, I'm going to take the chance and naturally get the antibody versus being forced to be given the antibody. And in that sense,
to prove you don't need the vaccine.
Because I think that the vaccine is worse than actually trying to get. But you don't want to take. It's just better to just not get sick. It's just better to and hopefully people realize that. But if we all stand together and say no, they're not gonna be able to do it. It's when regions of the country say, yes, I'll take it. And then the dominoes start falling. So we need to focus not so much on people in Texas, where probably the far majority would not take the vaccine, but more people on the East Coast and the West Coast, where they have a high probability of taking it. Those are the people that we need to convince. Be worried about these never-ending vaccines, because this is going to hurt your health.
Don't forget that once a vaccine is available, anyone who doesn't take the vaccine will be blamed for every subsequent death that takes place. So the narrative will shift to anti-vaxxers are murderers. I mean, you can see it clear as day, right? That's exactly what's going to happen. So we need to work ahead of time, like you said, to educate people about vaccine risks, especially in the case where the quality control may not be present in this because of the rush. And you think about, they're going to try to manufacture what? Billions of doses of a vaccine. That is not a small endeavor. That requires a massive factory massive throughput. Do you think they're going to stop the factory because they found a problem?
Exactly.
No. Especially when they have legal immunity.
Right. And even if they don't find the problem, if you have that just in power of numbers, there's a certain percentage, even if it's 0.5%, that's a lot of bad vaxes, that can hurt people. So that's why it's so important that we hit this at the pass, and I would much prefer a therapeutic like remdesivir or something else that comes onto the market than a forced vaccine. But what's strange is Fauci, he doesn't say that. Fauci's always saying the best result is the messenger RNA. Well, and if he's going to be a real scientist, he would say, I don't know what the best result is.
Yeah, because there are no clinical trials that have been completed on that.
Exactly. He has no idea. He can't say for sure that a therapeutic is worse off for the population than a vaccine, because there's been no study on it.
Right. No, these are the people who say there's no evidence that colloidal silver can kill bacteria. And we're evidence-based medicine people, and the vaccine will work. What? There's no evidence that the vaccine will work.
The sad thing is there is evidence that nano silver products and colloidal silver products do kill pathogens. There's a lot of studies out there. This is not like pseudoscience that we're talking about here. I mean, they use nano silver to fight Ebola in Sierra Leone. Yeah. That's a fact. They don't bring that up, on stage, and they don't also bring up that Homeland Security is buying nano silver. They're buying it. Right. They're procuring it. So why are they procuring it? Sounds like the mask issue, where they were procuring masks and telling everyone else not to use it.
No, it's just another level of denialism, except in the case of Big Pharma, they deny the existence of the table of elements. And I get the outer electron orbital shell of silver atoms. I mean, I guess if they're going to argue that silver doesn't exist, then okay, do we start at hydrogen? Let's start at hydrogen, and the Big Bang, and the composition of suns. Let's make it to helium, and let's work our way through the table of elements here, folks, because that stuff is real.
Right. And there's a lot of data. There's a lot of clinical data that shows that pathogens can be neutralized by using silver products and other things, other compounds that people can get that are at a natural, food store.
That's right. Absolutely. All right. Well, obviously, you and I could just keep brainstorming for hours on this. We better wrap it up, though, for the sake of both of our time. Look, I find these discussions truly fascinating. A lot of the reader comments are really good. I've got family members and friends that text me after watching these interviews, and they just love it. They absolutely love it. So you want to connect again next week and see where we are then?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Definitely. Yeah.
All right. We'll put this out, and I want to actually have some of my staffers transcribe some of this too, just highlight some of the really important areas. But thank you, Dr. Paul Cottrell, for spending time with us again today. Stay safe in New York City, and we look forward to joining you again in a week. Oh, tell us your websites again, your channels, anything you want people to know about.
The best way to see the content I produce is on YouTube, and that channel is Paul Cottrell. And in every video, I have links to my Twitter, my Facebook, my Patreon account, and my website. The website is the-studio-reykjavik.com. So don't worry about spelling it. Just click the link that's in all of my videos. And hopefully I can share the best that I can on what's going on in this crisis and to help. That's the whole point of this, is to try to help people.
You are already helping. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this. Twitter today announced they're banning any tweets that are critical of 5G. So now...
And did you hear yesterday that I think it's either the communications director or the CEO of YouTube stated that if anyone is stating that vitamin C or turmeric is a potential treatment to help with this crisis, that they're going to take down your video.
Amazing.
I mean, yeah, and there's lots of evidence of anti-inflammatories that help boost up your immune system, and and vitamin C has been known to help fighting pathogens for eons.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like they want us to get sick.
They do.
To take that vax.
No, clearly. No, next they're going to ban any discussion of water for curing dehydration.
Right.
It's going to be.
But don't you know, oxygen doesn't exist, and nor does hydrogen.
Oh, so that's right. Back to the table of elements. Yeah. That's right. The O2 is such a horrible thing. Yeah.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, we do have the left saying carbon dioxide is bad. I guess I wouldn't be surprised if big tech said oxygen is bad because humans need it. So it's really an anti-human agenda. That's what it comes down to. They just want us all to die, basically.
There is a transhumanism that's going on here. That
Really?
that down the road here, a artificial intelligence transhumanism movement that's going on.
Yep. Well, maybe we'll talk about that next time. Rise of the robots and the end of humanity. Yes, you have been slated for termination.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today, folks. Spread the word. Feel free to repost this video. Give credit to Dr. Paul Cottrell. And if you'd like to visit my website, it's pandemic.news as well as naturalnews.com. I'm Mike Adams. Thank you for joining us today. Take care. This has been a pandemic.news video report. If you want to live, read pandemic.news.